People in Whitlock County still whisper about the old photograph. They say if you stare at it long enough, the young woman's eyes begin to move. Some swear they've seen her blink. Others say she steps out from the frame when the room is dark. But the strangest part is this. Nobody remembers taking the picture, and nobody knows who the woman was. Part 1. The Portrait in Room 11. In the quiet town of Whitlock County, there stood a forgotten Victorian inn called the Waybrook House. Most people passed it without looking twice. Its windows were dusty, its wooden steps sagged, and its balconies leaned forward as if listening to the road. Only travelers who were desperate or lost ever stayed there. And that is how 18-year-old Sarah Whitaker ended up stepping inside on a rainy October evening. Sarah had been on her way to meet her aunt 2 towns over when her carriage wheel snapped on the old road. With thunder rolling in the distance, she had no choice but to walk toward the nearest shelter. The storm grew louder, shaking the sky as she followed a narrow dirt path through the trees. When she finally saw the inn's dim lantern glowing through the rain, she felt grateful. She did not realize she was walking toward the darkest chapter of her life. The innkeeper, a stiff-faced woman named Mrs. Alder, greeted her with a strange smile. Her eyes were pale and unblinking. She spoke softly, almost too softly, and offered Sarah a room for the night. Room 11, she said, was the only one available. Sarah thanked her and carried her wet bag up the creaking staircase. The hallway felt strangely cold, as if the air had been drained of warmth. The lights flickered, and the wooden floor groaned beneath her boots. When she reached room 11, she paused. Something about the door felt different from the others. The knob was colder, the wood darker. Still, she pushed it open. The room was old but elegant. Heavy curtains hung beside tall windows, and antique wooden furniture filled the space. A chandelier dangled above her, holding only 3 working bulbs. The wallpaper was ornate and faded, patterned with curling vines that seemed to twist when she wasn't looking directly at them. The space smelled of dust and lavender, a mix that felt oddly unsettling. But it wasn't the furniture or the wallpaper that caught her attention. It was the photograph on the wall. She stepped closer, her breath slowing. The portrait showed a young black woman standing in an antique Victorian room, very much like the one she was standing in now. The woman had smooth dark skin and expressive eyes that seemed deep with emotion. Her hair was neatly parted and pulled back. She wore an off-shoulder white blouse, simple yet elegant. Everything about her looked calm, confident, almost noble. But the deeper Sarah looked, the more uneasy she felt. The entire picture had a soft sepia tone, aged with scratches and a grainy texture. The edges were worn, as though countless hands had touched it. The background matched the room almost perfectly. The same tall windows, the same heavy curtains, even the same chandelier. Sarah turned and glanced at the chandelier hanging above her. For a moment, she felt as if the room inside the photograph was mirroring her own. Then she noticed something else. The woman's eyes. They were focused, sharp, and almost aware. There was a tension in her expression that Sarah had not noticed before. A quiet warning hidden behind a calm face. Sarah shivered. She tried to laugh at herself, telling her mind it was just an old picture. But the uneasiness clung to her like cold fog. She touched the frame. It felt too warm, almost like someone had just held it. Quickly pulling her hand back, she stepped away. The storm outside thundered again, and the windows rattled. Sarah unpacked her things and tried to settle in, but she kept glancing at the portrait. No matter where she stood, the woman's eyes seemed to follow her. When Sarah moved to the mirror, the portrait appeared behind her reflection. When she sat on the bed, she felt the gaze more strongly. It was as if the woman wanted to tell her something. Night grew heavier. The rain slammed harder against the windows. Sarah climbed into bed, pulling the blanket close. She left the small lamp on, not wanting the room to fall into darkness. She told herself she was just tired. The road had been long, and the storm unsettling. As sleep began to blur her thoughts, she glanced one last time at the portrait. The eyes were different. Sarah froze. The woman's gaze wasn't on her anymore. It was looking toward the door of the room. Her heartbeat quickened. She pushed herself up, staring hard at the portrait, refusing to blink. Maybe she was mistaken. Maybe the shadows were playing tricks on her. Maybe it was nothing but the storm and her imagination. But then she heard it. A soft knock at the door. 3 slow, gentle taps. She held her breath. No one should be awake at this hour. She waited, hoping it would stop. But the knocking came again, slightly louder this time. Her skin prickled. She looked back at the portrait. The woman's eyes were still fixed on the door, wide and intense now, as if urging Sarah not to answer. Another knock. This one sharper. Faster. Sarah rose from the bed, her legs trembling. She stepped toward the door, her hand reaching for the knob. But then she heard something behind the door. A whisper. A faint voice calling her name. Her name. That was impossible. No one here knew her. The portrait behind her seemed alive with warning. She turned sharply and saw something she would remember for the rest of her life. The woman in the photograph was no longer standing still. Her head was slightly tilted. Her lips parted, and her eyes were staring directly at Sarah again. Sarah stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the bed. The whisper outside the door grew louder, more insistent. The knob began to rattle. She had entered the Waybrook house seeking shelter from a storm. But now she understood. The true danger was not outside. It was inside room 11. And it had already begun. If you want part 2, tell me and I will continue the horror story in the same style. Engaging hook. People said the auction records of Charleston never lied. Every sale was written clearly. Every price. Every name. Every signature. But when Gadsden looked at the pages that night, he realized something terrifying. The truth was not written in the ledgers. It was walking around him. Part 2. The Unsuitable Ones. Gadsden barely slept after Claiborne left his office. The man had moved through the room like a shadow that understood the shape of every fear inside a person. Brunson sat across from him at the desk, staring at the ledgers as if they might catch fire. The storm outside had stopped, but the silence inside the auction house felt unnatural, as if the building itself listened for what would happen next. Brunson finally spoke. There is something you should consider. Men like Claiborne do not warn unless they believe they cannot be stopped. If he says 2 more sales remain, he believes those last 2 matter. Gadsden closed the ledger gently. The numbers on the page no longer felt like numbers. They felt like warnings. 17 sales. 17 men changed, shaken, broken in ways that none of them dared explain. And all because of one woman. Delphine. The next morning, Charleston was soaked from the night's rain. The streets glistened as workers opened shops and horses clopped over the wet cobblestones. Gadsden walked slowly to the auction yard, feeling as if eyes were on him from every direction. The city had always been loud with talk about trade, politics, and plantation wealth, yet now every conversation around him felt thin, like paper hiding something rotten underneath. Inside the auction house, the employees worked quietly, preparing paperwork for the next scheduled sale. They did not speak much anymore. They had noticed the pattern too. They had seen the same woman come and go 17 times. They had seen wealthy men arrive with pride and leave with faces drained of color. One of the clerks approached Gadsden. "Sir, Mr. Hammond has returned. He has sent instructions." Gadsden felt his stomach tighten. Hammond was powerful, connected, and feared. If the cycle had reached him, then the end truly was near. He opened the envelope. The message was short. He wanted Delphine returned to Charleston at once and resold immediately. No explanation. No apology. Only a single sentence calling her unsuitable. The same word again. The same word that now felt like a code for something far darker. Brunson arrived a few minutes later, already reading the anger in Gadsden's eyes. "Hammond kept her 4 days, he said. That is longer than most. What happened on that plantation must have been something serious." Gadsden nodded. "We need to speak with him." They traveled to Silver Bluff plantation the next morning. Hammond's estate stood large and proud, with wide fields stretching toward the river. Yet when they reached the main house, they found the atmosphere strangely tense. Servants kept their heads down. The overseer avoided their eyes. Everything suggested something had shaken the household deeply. Hammond refused to meet them at first. Only after Brunson insisted did the former governor step into the room. He looked exhausted. His clothes were neat, but his posture slumped as if holding up his own body had become a burden. Gadsden wasted no time. You purchased Delphine for $7,200. That is the highest price ever recorded in my ledgers. I need to understand what happened here. Hammond stared at them with strange, hollow eyes. He did not blink for several seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. She knew everything. Gadsden leaned forward. Everything about what? Everything about me, Hammond whispered. My land, my debts, my private writings, my past scandals. She knew things no one should know. She quoted letters that were hidden. She described events I had never told another person. Brunson frowned. Did she threaten you? No. Hammond shook his head. She only talked, calmly, kindly, as if she were discussing the weather. She sat in my study and spoke of the exact choices that had built my life. She spoke of my cruelty as if reading from a book. I could not look at her and pretend to be the man I claimed to be. She made my own history feel like a weight pressing down on my chest. Gadsden asked softly, did she harm you? Harm? Hammond laughed weakly. No blade can cut deeper than the truth. She did not raise her hand. She did not even raise her voice. But she made me see myself. Truly see myself. I sent her away because I could not survive another night in her presence. He paused, then added, and you should not try to interfere with those last sales. This is not a matter of law anymore. This is something older. Gadsden felt a chill as he and Brunson returned to Charleston. What did it mean, something older? Delphine was not acting like any person he had ever encountered. She was not acting like a spirit either. She was something in between. Something that walked inside the boundaries of the law while operating far beyond its reach. Back in the city, they expected Claiborne to appear with his usual calm expression to schedule the next sale. But this time, something had changed. Claiborne did not arrive alone. 2 days after Delphine returned from Silver Bluff, the auction house doors opened, and a quiet hush fell across the workers. Claiborne stepped inside with the same soft footsteps as always, but behind him came 2 strangers. They were tall, dressed in fine clothing, and wore expressions that did not blink. They seemed to carry the same strange darkness around them that Claiborne did, a darkness that felt like it soaked into the walls. Gadsden took a step back without meaning to. Brunson stood beside him, one hand already resting on the hidden pistol beneath his coat. Good morning, gentlemen, Claiborne said with a light smile. We have reached the final sequence. The 18th sale will be arranged today. The 19th soon after. And then this matter will reach its conclusion. Gadsden swallowed. What conclusion? The one that was always meant to happen. Claiborne placed a folded document on the desk. The buyer for the 18th sale had already been chosen. Someone with influence. Someone known for cruelty almost as much as ambition. Brunson leaned closer to Gadsden and whispered, we are running out of time. Gadsden nodded, because for the first time since this nightmare began, he realized something terrible. The cycle was not about the buyers. It was leading toward someone else. Someone very specific. If you want part 3, I will continue with the same tone, same style, and same 1,000-word structure. Part 3 The man WHO would not break. Engaging hook. People believed every man who bought Delphine broke within days. But the 17th buyer was not like the others. He had a reputation for cruelty so deep that even the darkest whisper avoided his name. If Delphine could break him, then something far worse than anyone imagined was moving through Charleston. Part 3. Gadsden felt uneasy from the moment Nathaniel Claiborne stepped into his office. The factor looked the same as always, but something in him had shifted. His calm face carried a tension that had never been there before. His hands stayed still at his sides, yet they held a strange energy, as if he was waiting for something to happen. When he placed the resale authorization on the desk, Gadsden sensed the final stage of the pattern beginning. Another return. Another man crushed by Delphine's presence. Another proof that something unnatural had entered Charleston's trade. But this time, it was James Henry Hammond. A man known for ambition so fierce it burned through his family. A man so confident that he believed nothing could intimidate him. A man who had crushed political enemies and ruled his plantations with iron discipline. If there was anyone in the South who believed he could not be shaken, it was Hammond. And yet, 4 days after the purchase, he sent Delphine back. Gadsden stared down at the document. Hammond's signature was still strong, but something about it felt uneven, as if the hand that wrote it had trembled. Brunson arrived soon after, closing the office door behind him with quiet caution. He took one look at Claiborne and sensed something was different as well. The three men stood in silence for a moment. The air felt heavier than usual, the room darker even though the lamps were lit. Gadsden broke the silence first. Did Hammond say why he returned her? Claiborne did not answer immediately. He looked toward the window where the gas lamps flickered against the glass. He finally spoke in a very calm voice. He learned what he was meant to learn. Brunson frowned. Which is what exactly? Claiborne turned toward him with an expression that hinted at amusement. That even a man who believes he fears nothing still carries secrets that live inside him like shadows. Delphine simply allows these shadows to speak. Gadsden's stomach tightened. What happened at Silver Bluff? Claiborne looked at him, and for the first time since their first meeting months ago, Gadsden noticed something unsettling in his eyes. Not anger, not fear, something like satisfaction. Perhaps you should ask Hammond yourself. That was all he said. The factor left the office without another word. His boots made no sound on the wooden floor, and when the door closed behind him, the lamps flickered strangely, as if the air had shifted around his absence. Brunson exhaled. We need to know what happened. We need to hear from someone at Silver Bluff before the 17th sale. Gadsden agreed. He could feel the story tightening around him like a thread drawing toward a knot. Whatever would happen at the end of the sequence, Gadsden felt certain now that he was moving toward something he would never be able to erase from his memory. Something that would live with him forever. Brunson left that same night for Augusta. 3 days passed with no word. On the 4th morning, Brunson returned to Charleston. His clothes were dusty from travel and his face looked drawn, exhausted. He did not wait to sit before he began speaking. I talked to Hammond's overseer. A man named Miller. He has been on the plantation for 20 years and he is not easily shaken. But when I asked about Delphine, he went white as chalk. He said the master gave him strict orders not to speak. But he spoke anyway. He said that the night Hammond brought Delphine to the plantation, she asked to speak with Hammond privately, just as she had done with every buyer before him. Hammond agreed. They went into his study. Miller said the lamps inside were lit. He could see the shadows moving through the stained glass windows on the door. At first he heard nothing. Everything was quiet, too quiet. Then he heard voices. Not raised voices. Not anger. Just conversation stretching for hours. He heard Delphine speaking softly. Then he heard Hammond's voice, deep but strained, as if he were trying to defend himself. After a long time, he heard Hammond pacing back and forth, the boards creaking under his weight. Then the sound stopped altogether. Miller waited outside the study until dawn. When Hammond returned from that room, he looked older. Much older. His face carried a strange emptiness, as if whatever pride he once had been taken from him. He ordered Miller to feed Delphine breakfast and bring her to the carriage. Hammond did not look her in the eyes. He did not speak to her again. He simply returned her to Charleston. Gadsden listened in silence. Something cold formed in his chest. What did she tell him? Brunson shook his head. Miller does not know, but he said Hammond walked with his hand pressed to his chest, as if something heavy was sitting inside him. He said the master prayed 3 times that morning. The man has not prayed in years. Gadsden leaned back in his chair, his hands trembling slightly. The 17th sale will be worse, he said. I can feel it. Brunson nodded. Claiborne told me something else before I left the plantation. He said that the 18th buyer has already been chosen. Chosen, Gadsden repeated. By whom? Brunson looked toward the door, as if expecting someone to appear. That is the part he did not say. A knock sounded on the office door. Gadsden's breath caught in his throat. Brunson slowly placed his hand on his pistol. The door opened, and standing there, dressed in a plain gray cloak, was Delphine. Her eyes were calm. Her expression was unreadable. She looked neither angry nor frightened. She simply stood there as if she had always belonged in the room. Gadsden felt his Heartbeat hammer in his chest. Delphine lifted her gaze and spoke in a quiet voice. It is time for the next sale. If you want, I can continue with part 4, create the image prompt, or build titles, descriptions, hashtags, or thumbnail text. Part 4. Engaging hook. Some secrets are buried in silence, but others whisper so loudly that even the bravest men start to fear the truth. And at Silver Bluff, every whisper seemed to call the same name. Part 4. The journey to Silver Bluff took 2 full days, and every mile felt heavier than the last. The wagon wheels rolled over red Georgia dirt, past pine forests that seemed to lean inward, as if they were listening. The air grew warmer and thicker, and the sunlight took on a strange dusty glow. Delphine sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on something no one else could see. The driver tried to start conversations with her, but she never answered. She barely blinked. When they reached the plantation gate, the driver felt an unexpected chill run down his spine. Silver Bluff was beautiful in the way old churches are beautiful, with tall columns and sweeping porches, but something about it felt wrong. The house was too still, too watchful, almost like it was waiting. The driver handed Delphine's papers to the overseer and left as quickly as he could. Even he knew that some places were better left behind. Inside the main house, Hammond walked through the halls with the pride of a man who believed everything he touched belonged to him. But when he saw Delphine standing there, something in his confident expression changed. He stared longer than necessary, as if he recognized her from somewhere, but knew that was impossible. He stepped closer, studying her face, her eyes, the strange calm that wrapped around her like a second skin. "You will serve inside the house," he said, though his voice shook slightly. "You will follow my rules at all times." Delphine nodded once, slow and deliberate. Hammond turned away quickly, annoyed at himself for feeling uneasy. Men like him were not supposed to feel fear. That night, Silver Bluff grew restless. The wind pushed against the shutters, the dogs barked without pause, and several field hands claimed they heard a woman humming near the riverbank. The tune was soft and old, something that did not belong to this place. Hammond dismissed the reports, but the unease stayed with him. Delphine moved through the house like a shadow. She spoke little, ate little, and slept even less. She seemed to know the layout of the building without being told, drifting from room to room with an odd kind of purpose. Other women in the house whispered about her. They said her eyes followed people even when she wasn't looking at them. They said she didn't leave footprints on the floor. 3 days after she arrived, strange things began happening. Late one evening, a maid named Sarah was carrying linens upstairs when she heard someone whisper her name. She turned, expecting to see one of the other servants, but the hallway was empty. She kept walking. The whisper came again, closer this time, like warm breath against her ear. She spun around, and for a brief moment she saw a figure in the shadows at the end of the corridor. It looked like Delphine, but the eyes glowed faintly, like dying embers. Before Sarah could scream, the figure vanished. Sarah ran downstairs trembling, but when she tried to explain what she saw, her words came out broken and confusing. Hammond told her she was overtired, and the overseer warned her not to spread foolish stories. But the fear stayed in her eyes, and she refused to go upstairs alone again. That same night, Hammond awoke to the sound of footsteps outside his door. Slow, steady footsteps that moved without pause. He lit a lamp and opened the door. The hallway was empty, but the air felt cold, colder than it should have been for a late summer night. He walked the length of the corridor and found nothing. But when he returned to his room, he discovered that his window had been opened, even though he was sure he had locked it earlier. He closed it firmly and tried to go back to sleep, but his dreams twisted into shapes he did not understand. He woke before dawn, sweating and confused, with the strong feeling that someone had been watching him in the dark. In the following days, the whispers grew louder. Servants heard crying near the attic. The cook claimed she saw a woman in white standing near the kitchen door at sunrise, only for her to vanish when she blinked. The stable boy insisted that Delphine spoke to the horses at night, not with words but with something too soft and strange to be human speech. Hammond tried to maintain order, but even he could feel Silver Bluff changing. The house creaked in new ways. The air smelled different, like old earth and river water. Lamps flickered when Delphine entered a room. Doors opened on their own. Shadows shifted when no one moved. One afternoon, Hammond found Delphine standing at the back of the property, staring at the river. The water flowed quietly, reflecting the sky like polished metal. Hammond approached her slowly, trying to ignore the tightness in his chest. "What are you doing out here?" he asked. Delphine did not turn her head. "Listening," she said. "To what?" he demanded, though he was not sure he wanted to know. "To the ones who never left." Hammond's throat tightened. "Who are you talking about?" Delphine finally looked at him, and for the first time, Hammond understood why even the bravest men felt uneasy around her. There was something ancient in her eyes, something older than the plantation, older than the land itself. "They remember you," she said quietly. "They remember everything." The wind shifted, carrying the smell of the river and something else, something metallic and bitter. Hammond stepped back, shaken by a fear he could not explain. He wanted to ask her more, but a sudden splash from the water made him turn. When he looked back, Delphine was already walking toward the house. That night the storm arrived. The sky turned black, and thunder rolled across the plantation like distant drums. Lightning flashed again and again, and every time it did, the servants swore they saw figures moving outside. Not people from the house. Not living people at all. Hammond tried to sleep, but the storm pounded the walls, and the shadows twisted like living things. And somewhere in the house, faint but unmistakable, someone began humming the same old tune heard near the river. A tune that did not belong to Silver Bluff. A tune that sounded like a warning. As the storm raged on, Hammond realized something terrifying. Silver Bluff was no longer his house. Something else had claimed it. And Delphine was at the center of it all. If you'd like, I can begin part 5 in the same style. Part 5. Engaging hook. Some houses hide their past. Silver Bluff did something worse. It let the past walk freely through its halls, as if it had never died at all. Part 5. The storm did not end with the sunrise. Dark clouds still dragged across the sky, heavy like bruises. The plantation yard was covered in broken branches, wet red mud, and the strange feeling that the storm had taken something with it. No one could explain the uneasiness, but everyone felt it. Even the birds stayed silent. Inside the main house, Delphine moved quietly through the morning shadows. The women in the kitchen whispered behind their hands as she passed, their fear growing with each strange event that had happened since her arrival. Some believed she brought the storm. Others believed she was calling something to the plantation, something that had been waiting for a long time. Sarah, the maid who had seen the glowing eyes in the corridor, refused to go upstairs at all. She stayed near the back door, jumping at every creak, clutching her apron like a shield. Whenever Delphine entered a room, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. But most of all, it was Hammond who struggled to keep control of the house. He had barely slept. His eyes were ringed with darkness, his hands shaking with something he would never admit was fear. During breakfast he dropped his fork twice, and once he swore he felt someone standing behind him. But when he looked, Delphine was the only one there, watching him with calm, unreadable eyes. Hammond cleared his throat and dismissed everyone early. He needed time alone to think, to understand why the house felt different, why the walls seemed to breathe, why certain doors refused to stay closed. But the house would not let him be alone. As Hammond walked down the hallway toward his study, he heard footsteps behind him. Slow, steady, unhurried. He turned, expecting to see one of the servants, but the corridor was empty. Only the long carpet, the tall windows, and the cold light that filtered through the storm clouds. He stood still for a long moment, listening. The footsteps stopped. He tried to shake off the dread. He was a man of status. A man who ran plantations. A man who commanded hundreds. He would not be intimidated by noises or shadows. But when he reached his study, his confidence cracked. The door was open. He never left it open. Inside, papers lay scattered across the rug. His ledgers had been pulled from the shelves. And on the center of his desk sat a single object he had not placed there. An old iron key, dark with age, thick and heavy. He picked it up, confused. He had seen this key before. Years ago, it belonged to a locked room in the attic, a room no one entered anymore, a room tied to secrets he had sworn never to speak of again. He dropped the key quickly, his hands suddenly cold. Someone was playing with him. Or warning him. He stepped back from the desk and breathed deeply. He needed answers, and his gut told him Delphine knew more than she said. He found her in the laundry yard, standing beneath the porch roof, staring at the rain-soaked fields as if she could hear something calling out to her across the land. "You," Hammond said, his voice harsher than he intended. "I need to speak to you. Now." Delphine turned toward him slowly. Her calm expression did not change. "Yes," she said. Hammond tried to glare at her, but the steady stillness in her eyes unsettled him. He gestured for her to follow him inside. She did, stepping soundlessly across the wooden floors, never hurrying, never slowing. He led her to the study and closed the door behind them. The air felt thick, almost too heavy to breathe. "Tell me the truth," he demanded. "Ever since you arrived, this house has been different. People whisper. Things move. The storm feels like it is sitting right on top of us. What do you know? What are you doing?" Delphine did not sit. She stood across from him, her expression as unreadable as ever. "I told you before," she said gently. "I listen." "To what?" Hammond said, frustrated. "To who?" Delphine looked toward the ceiling, toward the attic above. "To the ones who wait," she said. Hammond's jaw tightened. "You speak in riddles. I will not tolerate this." Delphine stepped closer to him. "You locked them away," she said quietly. "But you did not silence them. Pain does not end just because you close a door. Some hurts live longer than people do." Hammond felt the blood drain from his face. He knew exactly what she meant. He had hoped the memories would rot away in the dark, that time would swallow every trace. But time had not done its job. Something else was carrying those memories now, something that moved through the halls at night and whispered through storms. "You will not go near the attic," Hammond said sharply. "Do you understand me?" Delphine studied him for a long moment. "But you will," she said. Before Hammond could react, the chandelier above them shook violently. The candles flickered, swayed, then blew out all at once, leaving the room in near darkness. Hammond froze. Delphine did not move. A low groan came from the walls. The windows rattled in their frames. The air filled with the smell of damp earth and cold river water. Hammond fumbled for the matches, but before he could strike one, a pale shape flickered in the corner of the room. He gasped and stumbled backward. A figure, faint and shimmering, hovered for a second near the shelves before fading into nothing. Hammond's heart pounded. He grabbed the lantern and lit it with shaking hands. When the light filled the study again, Delphine was still watching him. "They are ready," she said softly. "For what?" Hammond whispered. "For you to remember," she answered. The storm outside grew louder, pounding against the walls like fists. Upstairs, something thudded across the attic floor. Once, twice, then again, faster and faster, like footsteps running. Hammond stared upward in horror. No one was supposed to be in the attic. No one was alive up there. Delphine stepped toward the door. "Night is coming," she said. "And when it comes, the house will tell its story whether you want it or not." She left the study, moving down the hall with that same strange calmness. Hammond did not stop her. He could not stop shaking. Somewhere above him, the footsteps continued. And each step felt like a countdown. Everything he had buried was rising again. "If you'd like, I can continue with part 6 in the same style." Part 6. Engaging hook. Some truths hide in daylight, but when night falls, they rise and walk. And on this night at Silver Bluff, the past was ready to walk straight through the front door. Part 6. The storm returned with more force as evening settled. Heavy rain slapped the windows, and the wind roared across the river like a wild animal searching for a way inside. Lamps flickered in every hallway. The house felt alive, trembling under the weight of something invisible, something old and angry. The servants gathered in the kitchen, huddled together with wide eyes. No one wanted to be alone. A pot of stew boiled on the stove, but no one touched it. Fear had taken their hunger away. They whispered about Delphine, about the attic, about the strange noises that had grown louder through the afternoon. Every person had heard them. No one dared speak too loudly about what they feared those noises truly were. Sarah, clutching her apron, kept glancing at the door. "It's getting worse," she whispered. "Every time the thunder hits, I hear someone walking upstairs. Not heavy steps, light ones, like a woman." The cook shook her head. "Stop talking like that. Spirits don't walk." But her voice was thin, trembling, full of doubt. At that moment, the back door opened, and everyone jumped. Delphine stepped into the kitchen, completely dry, even though she had been outside earlier. No one understood how. Her presence made the room go silent. Even the popping fire in the stove seemed to quiet when she walked past. She stood there, calm as always, her eyes drifting from face to face as if searching for someone. "You should stay together," she said softly. "Night will not be kind." The cook crossed her arms and tried to speak boldly. "What's happening, Delphine? Why is the house acting like this?" Delphine looked toward the ceiling. "It remembers." Before anyone could ask what she meant, a loud crack echoed through the house. The ceiling boards trembled. Dust fell from between the planks. The sound rolled across the house like rolling footsteps, sharp and hurried, heading toward the stairs. Hammond appeared in the doorway to the kitchen, his face pale, his hair damp with sweat though he had not been outside. He had been pacing the upstairs halls for an hour, trying to gather the strength to climb the attic stairs. But he had not managed to take even the first step. Every time he tried, the air grew so cold he could see his breath. He stared at Delphine, panic showing through the cracks of his usual arrogance. "What is happening in this house?" he demanded. Delphine did not answer right away. She held his gaze, studying him. "You know," she said finally. Hammond swallowed hard. He looked at the servants, then back at Delphine. "You don't know anything." Delphine stepped closer. "I know enough." Another slam sounded upstairs, followed by the unmistakable sound of a door swinging open on its own. The servants cried out. Hammond staggered back, gripping the frame of the door as if the house were shaking under his feet. "Something is up there," Sarah whispered, tears in her eyes. Delphine turned toward the stairs. "It is time." She began walking toward the hallway. Hammond grabbed her arm. "You aren't going up there." Delphine looked at his hand with a calm, cold stillness that made Hammond let go instantly. She stepped back and faced him fully. "This is not your house anymore," she said quietly. "You may own the land on paper, but the dead own the walls." Hammond's breath froze in his throat. Delphine continued toward the staircase, the servants following her with their eyes but not their feet. Hammond hesitated before stepping into the hall after her. Despite everything, he could not let her face whatever was upstairs alone. Or maybe he followed because some part of him knew that he was the reason the house was waking. The staircase creaked under Delphine's soft steps. She moved without fear. Hammond walked behind her slowly, gripping the railing, every muscle tight. The lantern he carried shook in his trembling hand. Halfway up, the air changed. It grew dense, colder than the wind outside. The steps felt as if they had absorbed something dark from the storm. Hammond tried to calm himself, but the fear crawled up his spine like a living thing. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched out before them, dim and long. Shadows moved along the walls, slow and curling, like fingers sliding across the wood. Delphine's eyes followed them calmly. "They are restless," she said. "Who?" Hammond asked, though he already knew. Delphine began walking. Hammond followed, his heartbeat pounding in his skull. They reached the attic door. It hung open, just as he feared. A cold, unnatural wind blew from within, carrying the smell of damp soil and old wood. Hammond felt the floorboards vibrating under his feet. Delphine stepped into the darkness of the attic. Hammond raised the lantern and followed. The attic was nothing like he remembered. Boxes had been pushed aside. Old trunks lay open, their contents scattered across the floor. The air shimmered, as if heavy with breath that did not belong to the living. Hammond's lantern flickered violently. Then he saw them. At first, just shadows. Then shapes. Men and women, faint as smoke, standing among the old trunks and beams. Their faces were blurred, but their eyes glowed with a cold, sorrowful light. Each ghostly figure seemed to stare directly at Hammond. He stumbled backward. "No, whispered. You aren't real. Delphine stood still in the center of the attic. The spirits moved around her but did not touch her. It was as if she belonged to their world as much as she did to the living. Hammond, Delphine said softly. Tell the truth. He shook his head wildly. I did nothing. Nothing you can prove. The lantern flame shrank. The spirits stepped closer, forming a circle around him. Their faces sharpened, their expressions filled with pain and anger. Delphine turned toward him. You hurt them. You punished them. You hid what you did to the women who cried for help. You buried their stories in this room. But the house remembers. A woman's ghost stepped forward. Her face was pale and blurred, but her eyes were full of fury. Hammond gasped. He recognized the shape of her dress, the curve of her shoulders, the way she held her head. He had known her. He had silenced her. Stop, Hammond begged. Please. I only did what was necessary. Delphine shook her head. Truth cannot stay buried forever. Not in this house. The spirits moved closer. Hammond stumbled backward until his back hit a wooden beam. The lantern fell from his hands and shattered on the floor. The attic went dark for a moment, then glowed with the pale light of the spirits. The ghosts leaned in toward him. Hammond screamed. Downstairs, the servants heard it. The sound cut through the house and echoed down the halls. They huddled tighter together, fear gripping their hearts. Delphine did not scream. She watched silently as the ghosts surrounded Hammond, their cold light flickering through the attic. When his screams finally faded, the attic grew quiet again. The spirits stood still around Delphine, waiting. They are not finished, Delphine whispered. Night is long, and justice is patient. If you want, I can continue with Part 7 in the same horror-filled style. Part 7. Engaging hook. Silver Bluff had taken its first victim. But the night was not done. The house had more to reveal, more to punish, and more secrets rising from the dark places where they had slept for far too long. Part 7. The scream traveled through every hallway of the house, sharp and long, like something tearing loose from the world. The servants in the kitchen froze. Some dropped spoons. One woman fainted. Sarah covered her ears and cried. No one moved. No one dared. But everyone understood the same terrible truth. Hammond's scream came from the attic. The storm outside raged even harder, as if the sky itself had joined in. Rain hammered the roof, and the wind pushed against the doors like fists. The lamps flickered and dimmed. The walls trembled. It was as if the house inhaled deeply after Hammond's scream, preparing for something even worse. Minutes passed. No one knew what to do. No one wanted to climb those stairs. But when the scream finally died, leaving a heavy silence behind it, the cook whispered in a trembling voice, "Someone has to check." No one volunteered. The silence stretched, thick as smoke. Then footsteps sounded in the hallway. Calm, slow, steady. Delphine appeared in the doorway of the kitchen. Her expression was unreadable. Her hair had loosened slightly, falling over her shoulders. For a second, Sarah thought she saw a faint glow around her, like soft moonlight. But when she blinked, it was gone. Delphine looked at each person in the room. Stay together, she said. Tonight is not safe. Sarah's voice shook. What happened upstairs? Delphine did not answer. Instead, she walked to the back of the kitchen, opened the door to the hallway, and stood for a long moment, listening to the house breathe. The floorboards creaked. The storm pressed against the walls. A cold draft slid down the staircase like a living thing. They will come down soon, she whispered. Nobody asked who they were. Delphine turned and left the room, disappearing into the main hall. The servants huddled back together, praying quietly, gripping each other's hands, begging the night to end quickly. Upstairs, the attic remained dark. Silent. But something had changed. The air shifted in the halls. The shadows felt heavier. A cold mist crawled slowly down the staircase, weaving across the steps like fingers searching for a pulse. And then the first sound came. A soft tapping. Tap, tap, tap. It came from the attic doorway. Light footsteps. A slow, dragging sound. Then something brushed the banister, lightly, almost playfully. Sarah screamed again as the sound traveled down the stairs. But then, unexpectedly, another figure appeared at the bottom of the staircase. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't Delphine. It was Hammond. He stood there completely still, facing the servants. His clothes were torn, his hair was tangled, his skin was pale as bone. His chest moved, but too slowly, like breathing had become a difficult task. His eyes looked strange, unfocused. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Everyone stared. Sarah whispered, "Sweet Lord in heaven." Hammond took one step forward. The floor creaked. Then another step. His boots left muddy prints on the polished wood. "Mr. Hammond," the cook said weakly. "Sir, are you hurt?" Hammond blinked, but he did not seem to hear her. His lips trembled like he wanted to speak, but he couldn't force the words out. Then Delphine suddenly appeared at the top of the stairs. "Do not touch him," she said, her voice strong and clear. The servants jumped back. Hammond turned slowly toward her, his eyes widening in fear. For the first time since he entered the hallway, he tried to speak. "No," he whispered, "no more." Delphine walked down the stairs, her steps calm and certain. When she reached the bottom, she stood face to face with Hammond. His whole body shook. He backed away, terrified. The servants pressed themselves against the walls. "They let you go," Delphine said softly. "But they are not done with you." Hammond grabbed the wall to steady himself. "Leave me alone," he rasped. "I can't breathe." Delphine stepped closer. "You will breathe when they decide you should." Her calm voice made everyone shiver. Hammond backed into the parlor doorway. The curtains blew wildly behind him as rain hammered the windows. He stared at Delphine as if she were the ghost. "What do they want?" he whispered. "Truth," Delphine said. "And justice." Hammond shook his head violently. "I never meant for it to happen. You don't understand." The servants inched closer, their fear growing. None of them had ever heard Hammond speak with fear. None of them had ever seen him look broken. "Tell them," Delphine said. Hammond sank onto one of the parlor chairs as if his legs had collapsed. His hands trembled violently. His voice finally broke. "There were 3 women," he whispered. 3. The servants gasped. Sarah covered her mouth. Hammond looked at the ceiling as if the spirits hovered just above him. Tears formed in his eyes. "I locked them in the attic," he said. "They knew things. They talked too much. I couldn't let the rumors spread." The servants whispered to one another. The storm howled even louder. Delphine watched him quietly. "You starved them," she said. "You thought the attic would silence them forever." Hammond cried out, "I was desperate. The elections, my reputation, everything was at stake." The lights flickered violently. Shadows twisted on the walls. The temperature dropped so quickly that each servant exhaled a cloud of white breath. Hammond's eyes widened. "They're here." Delphine did not move. "They have been here all night." The wind blew the parlor door open. A cold blast swept inside. The room grew darker as if the very air thickened. Hammond screamed again, covering his face. But the servants saw nothing. Delphine saw everything. 3 faint shapes glowed in the darkness behind Hammond. The blurred forms of women, their outlines trembling, their faces hidden by shadows. They hovered just above the floor, watching him. Hammond sobbed, "Please, I did wrong. But I am sorry. I swear I am sorry." Delphine stepped aside. The spirits drifted closer. The air hummed like distant thunder. Hammond shook, whimpering, trying to crawl away. But the ghosts closed around him, their cold light spilling over his body. The servants could not see them, but they saw Hammond's face twist in fear. They saw his body jerk violently. They saw the air ripple around him. Delphine whispered, "This is only the beginning." The lights dimmed. Hammond fell to the floor, trembling. The wind blew harder through the parlor, lifting the curtains like ghostly arms. Then everything went still. Hammond lay on the floor, breathing shallowly, eyes wide, staring at something only he could see. The spirits were gone, but the house did not feel relieved. It felt hungrier. Delphine turned to the servants. "You must be strong," she said. "The house will not rest until all truths are known." Outside, lightning struck the riverbank, lighting up the entire plantation in a blinding flash. And deep in the attic, a soft whisper echoed through the darkness. It was not a ghost. It was something older, something waiting. If you want, I can continue with part 8, building the tension even higher as the house reveals its darkest secret. Part 8, Engaging Hook. Some places feel alive in a way that chills the bones. Silver Bluff was one of them, and on the night the screams rose from the riverbank, everyone finally understood that Delphine was not the only thing haunting the plantation. Nightfall came early at Silver Bluff. The sky dimmed to a heavy blue, pressing low over the wide fields, and the air carried a sharp, nervous stillness. Workers hurried to finish tasks before the darkness settled. They whispered about the strange sounds that had drifted through the fields the night before. Some said they heard footsteps where no footsteps should be. Others swore they saw a woman in white standing between the trees before vanishing into thin air. Hammond ignored all of it. He believed fear made people foolish. But even he could not deny the sudden sickness that had spread among the workers or the animals that refused to go near the river. Inside the main house, Delphine sat alone in a small room near the back staircase. Her wrists were no longer chained, but she was watched constantly. Hammond claimed she needed rest. In truth, he wondered what she might do if she was left alone. She had stopped speaking entirely, and her silence bothered him more than her screams ever had. Delphine stared at a crack in the wall as if something was living in it. Her eyes were deep, hollow, and shining with an emotion that did not belong to this world. Her lips trembled, but she said nothing, not even when Mary, one of the house servants, brought her food. Mary tried to get her to eat, but Delphine only lifted one hand and pressed her fingers softly against her throat. The gesture looked like a warning. Mary set the tray down and left quickly, whispering a small prayer under her breath. Outside, a storm gathered. The wind grew restless. It twisted through the branches with a low moan that sounded almost like a voice. Hammond stood on the porch, watching the night thicken like black smoke. He had felt uneasy before, but now something colder touched the back of his neck. He turned, sharply, expecting someone behind him, but the porch was empty. Inside the house, Claiborne paced the hallway. He had arrived only hours earlier, claiming he needed to check on paperwork. But his pale face told a different story. He had been having nightmares for days. Every dream showed Delphine staring at him with eyes that glowed faintly, as if lit from inside by something terrible. He tried to push the dreams away, but they followed him even while he was awake. As he walked past Delphine's room, he heard something like a whisper drifting through the wall. At first he thought it was her voice, but then he realized the whispering was not in English. It sounded like an old language he had never heard before. A chill moved through his bones. Downstairs, Hammond prepared for bed. He poured himself a drink, but when he lifted the glass, he froze. A single brown hair floated in the liquid. It was long, too long to be Mary's or any of the house workers. He set the glass down, confused, and walked toward the stairs. As he reached the landing, he heard a soft hum. It sounded like a woman singing in a low, slow rhythm. The voice drifted from Delphine's room. Something inside him tightened. Delphine had not spoken in days. Now she was singing. He climbed the stairs with careful steps. Claiborne appeared at the end of the hallway, pale and tense. They looked at each other for a moment, then turned toward the room. The door was cracked open. Candlelight flickered inside. Hammond pushed the door slowly. What he saw made him stop breathing. Delphine sat on the floor. Her back was straight. Her eyes were closed. Her hands rested on her knees. The candle in front of her burned without moving, as if the air in the room had stopped flowing. A faint glow shimmered around her face, impossible to explain. The hum grew louder. The sound vibrated through the floor and into their bones. Claiborne felt his jaw tighten with fear. He tried to back away, but his feet would not move. Delphine's eyes opened. They were completely white. No pupils. No color. Just empty white. Hammond grabbed the doorframe to steady himself. His heart pounded. Delphine tilted her head slowly, like a puppet on invisible strings. Then the candle went out. Darkness swallowed the room. The hum cut off. Silence surged back with a violent weight. Claiborne whispered a prayer. Hammond took a step back. Then Delphine spoke. Her voice was low, but it carried through the dark like a blade. "They are waiting in the river." Claiborne felt his knees weaken. Hammond forced himself to speak. "Who is waiting?" Delphine did not blink. "The ones you sold. The ones you drowned. The ones you buried." The words hit Hammond like a blow. His breath caught. His mind raced through memories he had tried to bury. A cold sweat slid down his neck. Then she lifted one hand. Her fingers curved gently as if she was touching something only she could see. "They have your name," she whispered. The air in the room grew heavy. The floor creaked beneath them. A sudden gust of wind pushed through the hallway, though no windows were open. Claiborne stumbled backward. Hammond backed away slowly and nearly tripped over the rug. When he reached the hall, he slammed the door shut. He locked it. His hands shook violently. But the lock did not matter. Because from inside the room, Delphine started humming again. The sound grew louder, stronger. The walls vibrated. The floor trembled under their feet. And then the voices joined her. Not one voice. Dozens. Men, women, children. Their cries rose like water boiling over. Their words were broken, twisted, layered with pain that stretched across generations. Mary came running from the stairs, terrified. Workers from the yard rushed into the house. Everyone froze as the voices filled every room. Hammond shouted orders, but no one listened. Fear had taken them all. Outside, the storm broke open. Lightning split the sky. Thunder shook the earth. Rain crashed against the roof. Over the storm, over the voices, over everything, Delphine's song kept rising like a warning from the dead. Silver Bluff had awakened, and nothing would ever silence it again. If you want, I can continue with Part 9 in the same style. Part 9. Engaging hook. The storm had awakened something older than Silver Bluff, something that had waited in the dark soil and along the riverbank for far too long. On the morning after the voices filled the plantation, no one could pretend the haunting was only fear or imagination. The dead were close now, and they wanted to be seen. The rain finally stopped at dawn. Fog crawled across the fields, settling in thick waves that made the land look like a graveyard. People walked with caution, speaking only in whispers. No one wanted to disturb whatever had been stirred during the night. Hammond had not slept. He sat at his desk with his hands pressed against his temples, trying to swallow the fear that had taken root inside him. He kept hearing Delphine's voice whispering in his mind. "They have your name." The words echoed again and again, growing sharper each time. Claiborne entered the room quietly. He looked exhausted, as if he had aged 10 years overnight. His eyes were red. His hands shook slightly. He closed the door and leaned against it, breathing hard. "We cannot stay here," Claiborne said in a thin voice. "Something is wrong with this place. Something is wrong with her." Hammond glared at him. "Delphine is a woman. She is not a spirit. She is not some ancient demon. She is simply unstable." Claiborne shook his head. "You heard the voices. You felt the floor shake. That was not her alone. That was something else." Hammond opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. The truth pulled at him like a heavy weight. He had lived through storms before. He had heard thunder shake the windows. But last night was different. Last night, the house had breathed. Before either man could speak again, a loud knock struck the door. It sounded hard enough to rattle the frame. Mary stepped inside, her face pale. "You need to come," she whispered. "Everyone is gathering by the river. They found something." The men followed her outside. Fog swirled around their legs as they walked. Workers stood in a tight circle near the riverbank, whispering prayers and clinging to each other. When Hammond approached, they stepped aside in fear. On the muddy ground lay footprints. Too many footprints. They were fresh, wet, bare, small and large. They looked like the prints of men, women, and children. They led from the river toward the house. Claiborne covered his mouth with one hand. "This is impossible." Hammond crouched to study the prints. The mud inside them had not dried. Some still held small puddles of water, as if the feet had stepped out only moments earlier. "Who saw this first?" Hammond asked. One man raised a trembling hand. "We came out here to check the damage from the storm. The footprints were already here. No one made them. No one alive." A cold wind brushed across the back of Hammond's neck. He straightened quickly and wiped his hands on his pants. "Fill the prints," Hammond said. "Smooth the ground. Erase everything." But as soon as one worker stepped toward the prints, the ground trembled. A thin crack split the earth near the river. Water bubbled up through it as if something was rising underneath. Everyone stepped back except Hammond, whose stubborn pride anchored him to the spot. The water spread slowly, forming a shiny black puddle. Then a small object floated to the surface. A gold button. Hammond froze. He knew that button. It came from a coat. A coat belonging to a man who had disappeared years earlier after a punishment gone too far. Hammond had buried the truth deep in the swamp, hoping the land would swallow it forever. Now the land was giving it back. The ground split wider. More objects surfaced. A broken comb. A necklace. A child's wooden toy. A torn strip of cloth. All things Hammond recognized. The workers began backing away. Mary whispered a warning. "We need to leave." Claiborne grabbed Hammond's arm. "Come on. We should get inside." But Hammond stood frozen, staring at the rising objects. His mouth moved, but no words came out. Suddenly, every bird in the trees above them took flight at once. Their wings beat the air in a frantic rush. A harsh scream echoed through the branches, loud enough to stop hearts. People fell to their knees. Some covered their ears. Some ran. The scream was not from a bird. It came from the house. Hammond spun around and ran toward it. Claiborne and Mary followed close behind. They burst through the front door and rushed toward the upstairs hallway. The scream came again, louder, sharper. It echoed off the walls. Hammond pushed open Delphine's door and stepped inside. Delphine was standing in the center of the room. Her eyes were white again. Her skin glowed faintly, as if reflecting light that was not in the room. Her lips trembled with every breath, as though she was fighting something inside her. The furniture around her shook violently. The candle on the table slid across the wood and fell to the floor. The window shutters banged open though no wind entered the room. Delphine looked straight at Hammond. "You cannot hide," she said softly. "They are closer now." Claiborne stepped back, terrified. "Who is closer?" Delphine raised her hand slowly and pointed toward the window. "The ones you drowned." A cold pulse of fear hit Hammond like a punch. He took a step toward her, trying to regain control. "You do not know what you are saying." Her voice grew stronger. "You killed them. You buried them. You used the river to hide what you did. You thought the water would keep your secrets." Thunder rumbled in the distance even though the sky had cleared. The room darkened as if shadows thickened on the walls. Delphine closed her eyes again. When she opened them, the white had deepened into a bright glow. "They have risen." The floor shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. In the silence that followed, a faint sound drifted through the open window. A soft splash. Then another. Then many. Claiborne walked to the window slowly and looked out. His face drained of all color. "Hammond," he whispered, "you need to see this." Hammond hesitated, then stepped forward. When he reached the window, his breath caught in his throat. Figures stood at the riverbank. Dark silhouettes. Still shapes. Silent. More appeared behind them, rising like shadows from the water. They stood shoulder to shoulder, facing the house. Their heads tilted slightly as if they were listening to Delphine's voice. Claiborne backed away from the window. "This is not possible." Delphine spoke again, her voice almost a command. "They have come for the truth." Outside, the figures began slowly moving toward the house. Their feet made no sound. The fog swallowed them, then revealed them again as they advanced. Hammond stumbled back. For the first time in his life, he felt his own heartbeat like a warning drum. The dead were coming, and there was no place left to hide. If you want, I can now write Part 10 final part in the same style. Part 10 final part. Engaging hook. The river had whispered secrets for years, but Silver Bluff was finally ready to reveal everything. Delphine's presence had changed the land, the house, and the men who thought they could control her. Tonight, nothing could stop the reckoning. Fog rolled over the fields at dawn. The night's storm had left the plantation soaked and silent. Birds did not sing. Animals hid. A deep stillness pressed down on the land. Inside the house, the atmosphere was heavier than ever. Every wall, every floorboard, every shadow seemed to watch. Hammond had not slept. He sat in the parlor, gripping the arms of a chair, his hands trembling. The riverbank had revealed the figures last night. Dark shapes, rising slowly, unstoppable. He had seen faces in the fog, faces of people he had tried to erase from memory. Faces of the dead. Claiborne stood near the window, pale and tense. His jaw was tight. He watched the fog swirl over the fields, and he could feel the weight of what was coming. The last 2 sails were to be completed tonight. Delphine had not spoken since yesterday, but her presence was felt everywhere. It pressed against their minds like a cold hand. Outside, faint ripples appeared on the river. Dark forms moved through the water, heading toward the house. The air smelled of wet earth and something older, something the plantation had tried to bury. Delphine sat in the parlor. Her eyes were calm, her posture still. But the air around her shimmered faintly, like heat above a summer road. She did not speak. She did not need to. Hammond and Claiborne both understood that she held the power now. She controlled what would happen next. Hammond tried to move toward her. His legs felt heavy, as if the fog itself clung to him. "You cannot do this," he whispered. "I am the master of this house. I own this land." Delphine tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. The faint glow around her grew brighter. Her eyes, white and luminous, locked onto his. A cold clarity passed over Hammond. The truth slammed into him with unbearable force. He had never truly owned anything, never truly controlled anyone. The illusion of power had been stripped away by the very person he thought was powerless. The door creaked open. The fog pressed into the house. Shapes formed. The dead had arrived. They were slow, deliberate, silent. Every step toward the house felt like the earth itself was shaking. Hammond stumbled backward. "Stay away," he shouted. "You cannot take me." Delphine rose slowly. She did not speak, but the air shifted. The fog parted slightly around her, forming a path straight to Hammond. He could not turn away. The first figure entered the parlor. A woman, face pale and eyes hollow. She looked at Hammond and whispered a name he had tried to forget. One by one, more figures followed. Children, men, women. They did not touch him, but their presence pressed into his mind. Every sin, every cruelty, every lie he had hidden for years was revealed. Hammond fell to his knees. He tried to speak, tried to apologize, but no words would come. Claiborne stepped back, watching silently. The house trembled. The candles flickered. The air grew colder with every passing second. Delphine's voice finally broke the silence. "Justice does not wait. Truth does not hide. You will see what has been hidden." The figures closed in. Hammond's mind filled with images of the people he had enslaved, the lives he had destroyed. Each vision was sharp, vivid, unbearable. He cried out, but the sound was swallowed by the storm that raged outside, now returning as lightning split the sky. The parlor door slammed shut on its own. The windows shook violently. Water from the storm pooled at their feet. The spirits surrounded Hammond, but they did not harm him physically. Instead, they forced him to see, to feel, to understand every choice he had made. And its cost. Hammond fell forward, covering his face. He wept. He screamed silently. The house echoed with his remorse. The storm and fog seemed to respond, rising higher, pressing against the walls, shaking the foundation. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the presence retreated. The fog lifted slightly. The storm calmed. The figures disappeared, fading into the river and fields. Hammond lay on the floor, exhausted, hollowed, forever changed. Delphine knelt beside him. Her glow dimmed to a soft warmth. She spoke quietly, almost like a blessing. "You will live, but you will never forget. Every life you wronged, every choice you hid, will stay with you. Let it guide you, or you will continue the cycle." Claiborne looked at her, awestruck. "Is it over?" Delphine nodded. "For now. The last 2 sails are complete. The cycle ends tonight." Hammond did not speak. He simply nodded weakly, staring at the floor, understanding for the first time the true weight of his actions. Delphine rose, calm and composed. She moved toward the door. Claiborne followed. "Where will you go?" he asked. "I am not yours." "I never was," she replied. Then she stepped into the mist outside. She vanished before their eyes, leaving only a faint glow in the fog. The house was quiet again, but it felt different. Lighter, yet heavier. The air carried memory, history, truth. Silver Bluff had been cleansed, but not without leaving marks on the living. Hammond and Claiborne never spoke of that night again. Silver Bluff stood silent by the river. The workers whispered that the land had a new guardian, Someone who watched, who remembered, who ensured that truth would not be buried again. And somewhere, in the fog along the riverbank, Delphine moved like a shadow, carrying justice, carrying memory, carrying a warning to those who thought power could blind them to consequence. If you enjoyed this chilling journey into history and horror, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will keep you awake at night. Share this with friends who love suspense and history, and comment below your thoughts about Delphine's power and the fate of Silver Bluff.